Okay, let's start the show with this catchy tune.
Welcome to the Heart-Centered Life podcast, where we discuss everything that relates to creating a life that makes you the most fulfilled. Join us every Tuesday morning for great ideas on how to use creativity to find that heart-centered space that is your deepest happiness, so you can then successfully create the positive change that you wish to see in the world.
Now, here's your host.
Hello everyone, I'm Erma Bombeck and welcome to episode 4 of the Heart-Centered Life podcast. Today we are going to talk about having the courage to be creative. Now, so many of us do not make creativity a daily practice or even a habit. And this is despite there being so many known benefits to being creative. I'm just going to list a few of those benefits here. The first benefit to being creative is that we become better problem solvers when we are creative. And by creative, I mean engaging in the arts, the expressive arts, including paint, drawing, music, dance, pottery, and sculpture. Anything that is expressive and creative brings us as human beings a lot of benefits. One of the known benefits is that creativity makes us better problem solvers, because creativity forces us to engage both the analytical and the expressive parts of our brain. And when we do this consistently, we tend to see patterns and novel solutions to problems that we could not see before. Creativity also connects us more authentically with our communities, because when we are creative and when we are creative with other people, we get into a zone or a flow where inhibitions are reduced, and the barriers that we put between ourselves and others that causes us to judge, discriminate, distrust, and fearful of others tend to dissipate, allowing us to engage with people on a more authentic, friendly, real, and empathetic level. Creativity also helps us save money, because when we engage in the activity of producing something that is original to us, that is unique to us, that's an expression of our own personal beliefs and personality, we tend to consume less because that activity is deeply rewarding, and we become more willing to trade in the activity of consuming things for the activity of producing things. And the more we produce, the more we save on buying things. Creativity also gives us an expanded sense of time, because when we create, we enter what is known as the creative zone. And in that space, we tend to lose sense of time, because we are so engaged in expressing what we feel, think, or see internally. But ironically, when we are in that creative zone and creating something, we become more productive in a given span of time. Creativity also creates self-awareness, because creativity forces us to look at ourselves more honestly and more clearly. Creativity also instills in us a sense of freedom, where we feel liberated and able to engage with the world around us without judgment. As we take more risks, try new things, strip away our inhibitions in positive ways, through the act of self-expression, we get a sense of freedom, a childlike freedom that allows us to see the world in a way that is fresh, uninhibited, and authentic. Creativity also relieves stress. When we are creative, we are meditative and more mindful of what we are feeling internally, because we are forced to be in the moment, and studies have shown that being mindful and in the moment reduces stress, anxiety, and depression. Creativity also facilitates personal growth, because creativity forces us to get out of our comfort zone. Just like me making this podcast, we tend to grow in ways we never could have imagined, as we find pride and satisfaction in creating something that we never thought we could do before. So on a personal level, creativity has all these benefits. It forces us to grow. It relieves stress. Creativity provides us with a sense of freedom that is almost childlike. Creativity gives us a sense of self-awareness that we might not have without engaging in the act of creative expression. We get an expanded sense of time as we get into the creative zone. We save money. We connect with our community and the people around us on a more authentic and genuine level. And we become better problem solvers. But as more people engage in the act of creating, society as a whole develops as well, for a variety of reasons. Number one, when people are creative, people become more innovative, and more innovations that fuel the economy and spur economic growth tend to be produced in creative societies. Not only that, a society that is more creative has a stronger sense of identity as citizens identify with creative works that are produced within that society, and as national conversations about who that society is come up from having creative works in their midst. But despite these personal and sociological benefits, and I suspect the yearning for each one of us to create, despite of all that, so few of us create to express ourselves and to manifest externally our own internal reality. And I've asked myself why that's the case. It may be that society idolizes the extrovert so much that people who are outgoing, open, friendly, the shakers and the movers in society, those living an exciting social life, that we as a society have tended to reward the extrovert with attention, praise, and adoration, that the internal journey, the journey within, to find out who we are and to create from that space, the quest to find that place of inner and deep gladness that each one of us has been sidelined for the pursuit of external gratification. And this has happened so much that we have lost that center, and there is a dire need to find it again. Many of us who are professionals have lost that ability to turn inward for guidance and for help and for fulfillment, and have tended to turn towards drugs or alcohol or succumbed to stress, overwhelm, and burnout without finding a positive way to support mental and emotional health. There are many ways to find this center, but most of it involves being quiet and calm. For example, meditation, yoga, taking a long warm bath, saying a prayer, that to many of us busy individuals and professionals can be hard to do. But creativity, whether it's drawing, doodling, painting, music, is another effective way to find that center to support mental and emotional health. Henry Miller, who was a writer, once said that, I quote, "I turn to painting when I can no longer write. Painting refreshes and restores me," unquote. And that's a great way to think about the expressive arts. That artistic expression is a way to refresh and restore our tired souls when we feel stressed, overwhelmed, burned out by our professional and personal lives. Creativity has been proven to be an effective way to access the heart center. And it's a great way to access the heart, find that space where we can truly be at ease and where we are truly aware of what makes us happy and how to get it. And once we are able to use creativity to access the heart center, we shouldn't just stop there. We should also create for the people and the world around us from that internal realization about our external world, to make our internal awareness an external reality. Not only does creativity allow us to feel centered and grounded, but creativity can also take us from the inward out and help us solve many of the problems that we see in the world. And it is at this point that we need the courage to create, because there is so much at stake if we create and show the world what our internal reality is. It is vulnerable because the world can finally see who we are and what we are about. And there are also all kinds of barriers, mostly mental and emotional, that prevent us from creating and providing solutions to the problems that the world faces. And we have to break through these barriers. Being creative also requires us to take a chance on ourselves and to give ourselves a chance to move ahead despite self-doubt, discouragement, and anxiety, which really isn't an easy task. Creativity requires us to take all kinds of risks. Risk of exposure, risk of rejection, the risk of judgment, or worse, indifference. Like when you publish something or put something out into the world, and this is all you hear. Yep, crickets. That's one of my biggest fears. Creativity, as Henry Matisse acknowledged, takes a lot of courage. And to be honest, it took me a lot of courage to start this podcast, think about programs that I could put in place, to make the decision that I would like to be the change I want to see in the world. And truth be told, I'm still fearful about putting myself out there. And I have to keep reminding myself that my desire to make a difference should motivate me more than my fear, because I would regret not answering my heart's call to be the change that I would like to see in the world. And so I have to try to find the courage to create that external reality that I hope will make a difference in the world. So we need courage to create, but how do we find it? We know what courage is not. It's not the absence of fear, and we've heard this so often. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is not physical bravery. Courage is not mere recklessness or thoughtlessness. Courage is not pure self-confidence or sheer strength of will. Courage is not stubbornness. And the courage to create cannot be any of this, because creativity, as we know, is always collaborative. Professor Rollo May writes in his book, The Courage to Create, that, and I'm quoting his book here, a chief characteristic of this courage is that it requires a centeredness within our own being, without which we would feel ourselves to be a vacuum. The emptiness within corresponds to an apathy without, and apathy adds up, in the long run, to cowardice. That is why we must always base our commitment in the center of our own being, or else no commitment will ultimately be authentic. And he goes on to say, the word courage comes from the same stem as the French word coeur, meaning heart. Thus, just as one's heart, by pumping blood to one's arms, legs, and brain, enables all the other physical organs to function, so courage makes possible all the psychological virtues. Without courage, other values wither away into mere facsimile of virtue. In human beings, courage is necessary to make being and become possible. An assertion of the self, a commitment, is essential if the self is to have any reality. This is the distinction between human beings and the rest of nature. The acorn becomes an oak by means of automatic growth. No commitment is necessary. The kitten similarly becomes a cat on the basis of instinct. Nature and being are identical in creatures like them, but a man or woman becomes fully human only by his or her choices and his or her commitment to them. People attain worth and dignity by the multitude of decisions they make from day to day. These decisions require courage. This is why Paul Tillich speaks of courage as ontological. It is essential to our being. And I unquote. The Amazon link to Professor May's book is in the show notes below. And I encourage you to check it out. But it's important to realize that to Professor May, courage requires a kind of heart-centeredness. A heart-centeredness that is based on commitment and choices. The courage to make these commitments and choices is essential to our being. It's ontological. So we know that creativity is a great way to center ourselves and come to a heart center, and we can make that decision every day to be creative. And when we do so, we find that place of deep gladness and deep happiness where we feel truly connected to the world around us and where we know that everything about us and our world is okay. But when we get to this place, we also come to the realization that there is so much more we can do to help our world. When we know we are okay, we shouldn't just stop there. We need to extend ourselves to the world around us. And when we are able to meet the world's deepest hunger from that place of deep joy and fulfillment, we will be truly fulfilled. Our sense of fulfillment commensurates with what we give back to others. And this is where we truly need to be courageous, because it's not easy to put back into the world the part of ourselves that we have found with so much effort. So how do we find the courage to be creative? To believe in yourself, your dreams, your ideas, and to put yourselves back into the world. There is a lot of information out there about how to find courage in today's culture. You've probably heard of Brené Brown, who is a research professor at the University of Houston. Her TED Talk on shame, vulnerability, and courage is one of the most watched TED Talks ever. And I have included the Amazon link to a book, Dare to Lead, which is a great book to read for ideas on how to be vulnerable when you're in a position of leadership. Professor Brown also has a Netflix documentary. It's a 1-hour documentary on what it means to choose to be courageous in today's culture. And you can read her book and watch her documentary on Netflix to give you a really great idea of what being courageous means. What I'm going to talk about here is how I found the courage to create and to put my private thoughts, ideas, and hope for a better world out there. And it is scary, I have to admit. I literally read word for word for my first few audio recordings and my podcasts. And this is my first podcast episode that I'm not reading from a script. I just have some bullet points and a general idea of what to say. And to be honest, this is terrifying. Even for someone who has stood in front of law students and taught law for 12 years. Making this podcast is pushing me beyond my comfort zone, and it is terrifying. But I wanted my podcast and my work here to be authentic and real, and to connect with as many people as possible. And on so many people's advice, people who have listened to my previous podcasts, and also to honor what I teach, I have decided to lose the script and try as much as I can to speak from my heart. And so, if this podcast comes a little bit more disjointed than the ones before, that's the reason. I am trying to lose the script and speak from my heart. So what does being courageous feel like for me and look like? Here are my top 3 ways to cope with vulnerability and finding the courage to create and to put your creation out there in the world. And I'm not talking about a research paper or a piece of scholarship that I'm so used to producing. I'm talking about a podcast or a program that I'm working on that is a product of my most authentic self. So the first thing that I did is to acknowledge the importance of making progress, however small my progress may seem, and to be gentle with myself in this process. As a law professor, I'm only too familiar with tight deadlines on so many levels. But when it comes to creativity, it is so important to realize that as long as you are making progress in the right direction, it's okay. Because I think putting yourself, and by yourself I'm talking about myself here, under a tight deadline is counterproductive, and it actually breeds fear because you're putting something out there before you're ready to have it published. I had planned to launch this podcast way back in July this year. And I set a deadline for myself, a deadline that by hook or by crook, I was going to meet, and that was July 15th. As you know, I haven't met that deadline. My plan is to record 5 podcast episodes before I actually launch my podcast, and this is episode number 4. But around summer this year, or I would say April, late March, early April, my dad fell really sick. And I had to rethink a lot of my priorities, and I had spent part of the summer with my family in Malaysia, to be with my dad. And I didn't get much done in terms of how much progress I made with my podcast when I was with my family in Malaysia. But when I came back to the US, I had more things and more commitments that came up. I had to attend conferences that I had committed to earlier in the year. Then with classes starting, committee work started, I was swamped with schoolwork, and I also had to have surgery for an accident earlier this year. And for the life of me, I could not launch the podcast. And I kept pushing the launch date back and back and back. And here we are, recording the 4th episode of the podcast and it's not launched yet. I was also planning to launch a couple of programs under my company's umbrella, but it looks like I will have to push that back as well. And to be honest, for a while, I had thought that not meeting the deadlines for all that I had planned meant that my podcast and my business was a failure. But the space that I had given myself in this time to create has been very liberating, and it has allowed me to be myself. And I think that when we are truly ourselves, fear loses its grip on us, and we have the courage to be more vulnerable and more authentic, and as a result, the work that we produce tend to be more effective or inspiring or moving. So that's the first thing. Progress is good enough. We don't need perfection. We don't necessarily need to meet the deadlines we've set for ourselves. And that's it. Progress is good enough. The second thing is to pay attention to how the ego protects you, but also keeps you from doing amazing things with your life and from being a successful, happy, and fulfilled person. What your ego does is protect you, and the ego will give you whatever reasons it can come up with to prevent you from being creative. One of the many things that are consistently on my mind as I work on the podcast and my programs is, what if all of this is just a waste of time? What if I put all this out there and it does not make a dent in the world? If all my motivations for doing this is wrong, and I waste all this time, money, and energy chasing a dream that would never materialize, nor make the impact I hope it will make. This voice is loud, so loud sometimes that I have to fight against it to keep going. And really, that's my ego telling me that if I'm creative and that I put my work out there into the world, I could end up being hurt. And the way I cope with this is to tell myself that everything will be okay. If this doesn't work the way I hope for it to, my world is not going to end. And you know what? It is really okay if things don't work out the way you want it to in the first iteration. What that simply means is that I may have to think about it a little more, change some things here and there, go back to the drawing board, and re-strategize. There is something unbelievably liberating when you tell yourself that the fear that you feel is a natural part of the creative process because it means that you're taking risks. Risks that are necessary to help you build your resilience, perseverance, and character that will ultimately bring you the changes in the world that you want to see. Nothing changes for the better without you taking risks. So there we have it. That's number 2. It's okay to fear, but don't let fear prevent you from taking some risks in life. And the third way in which I have found courage in this process is to have faith and trust the journey. So many times in my life, now when I look back, I never thought I'd end up where I did. I never thought I'd get a scholarship to Cambridge University or to Stanford University, schools that I only read about in books and newspapers and movies before I went there. Never would I have thought I would have to take a job in Mississippi after graduating from law school, or fall in love and get married and have the most beautiful child who makes me so happy every time she smiles. Looking back, I think that I am where I am because life has a way of taking you where you need to be. And we just need to trust the process and the journey and take things one step at a time. It's the same thing with creativity. Creating something completely new and putting it out into the world in the hopes that it will change the world for the better is really a journey into the unknown. At the time of this podcast recording, I'm really taking a journey into the unknown without knowing what the next step will be in terms of how the business will develop and who will come into its world as collaborators or partners. All that I have right now is a vision or a dream for a better tomorrow for our children. And as I record this podcast, I have a picture of my daughter right in front of me as a reminder of why this is so important. And I think that a better tomorrow will only materialize when we trust that the journey that we are taking to create that better tomorrow is 1,000 times more rewarding and exhilarating and necessary than the actual destination. And if we really think about it, there really isn't a final destination, because when we get there, we set new goals and the journey continues. By trusting the journey to take you where you need to be, when you need to be, we find the courage to create and continue to create. And so there we have it. That's number 3. To find the courage is to know that there is a purpose to your creative journey and that you just need to trust it. So those are my 3 ways to find the courage to create. I hope that you have found this podcast helpful. And in the show notes below, I have a PDF document that lists out these 3 ways in which I have found courage, to help you think about how you could use these 3 suggestions to find courage in your own creative journey. I encourage you to download that PDF and to work with it. I would be delighted and happy to hear what your thoughts are, how that PDF worked for you. And you can reach me through email at elena@elenaboyd.com or through my website, www.elenaboyd.com. Join me next week for episode 5, where we will discuss a special audio recording that I made on the ways in which we are hardwired to be moral and why turning inward for guidance makes sense. Until next week, thank you for tuning in.
Spread the word by leaving a rating and review on iTunes.